Hey, hey, hey! Welcome back to English in Fluency. I'm Alex. And honestly, I'm really glad you clicked on this one because today's lesson is going to change the way you listen to English forever. I mean that. Not in a dramatic, exaggerated YouTube way, but in a real, practical, oh wow, that's why I kept getting confused kind of way. Here's the thing. Have you ever listened to someone speak English? Maybe in a podcast, maybe in a movie, maybe just a coworker talking fast during lunch, and you understood every single word, but somehow you still missed the point. Like, you heard the sentence, but you didn't catch why something happened, or what caused what. Yeah, that's not a vocabulary problem. That's not a grammar problem either. That is a connection problem. And today, we are going to fix it, together, step by step, with a story that I think you're going to really enjoy. So stick with me for the next few minutes, because by the end of this video, you will be able to hear small words like so, because, since, therefore, and a bunch of others, and instantly know, in real time, without translating in your head, whether someone is giving you a reason or a result. And trust me, once your brain starts catching these signals automatically, listening to English stops feeling like a wall of noise and starts feeling like a conversation you're actually part of. That's the goal today. Not just understanding words, understanding logic, the logic that connects one idea to the next. Before we jump into the story, let me just quickly explain, in the simplest way possible, what we mean by cause and effect signals. A cause is the reason something happens. An effect is the result, the thing that happens because of that reason. In real conversation, native speakers almost never just throw two facts at you and expect you to figure out the connection yourself. They use small connecting words to basically hand you the logic on a plate. Words like because, so, since, as, therefore, that's why, as a result, due to, owing to, consequently, for this reason, and a few more. These words are like little road signs. They tell your brain, hey, pay attention. What comes next is either the reason for what I just said or the result of it. Once you can hear these signs clearly, you stop getting lost, even in fast, natural speech. Okay, enough explaining for now. Let's get into the story, because honestly, the best way to learn this is not from a list. It's from real people, in a real situation, using these words the way they actually get used. So, picture this with me. It's early morning in a small coastal town, the kind of place where the coffee shop owner knows your order before you even walk through the door. Our main character today is a woman named Priya. Priya is 26 years old. She works as a graphic designer, and this particular morning, her whole day is about to be flipped upside down because of one tiny thing. A broken alarm clock. Priya's alarm didn't go off, so she woke up nearly 40 minutes late. Did you catch that? Her alarm didn't go off is the cause. So she woke up late is the effect. That little word so connects the two. It's telling us, this happened, therefore, that happened. Simple, right? But in fast speech, that tiny word can slip right past you if your ear isn't trained for it. That's exactly why we're slowing it down today. Priya jumped out of bed in a panic. Because she had a huge client presentation at 9, she couldn't afford to be late. See that one? Because she had a huge client presentation is the reason. She couldn't afford to be late is the result. Notice how this time the word because came first, at the beginning of the sentence, instead of in the middle. That's something I really want you to notice throughout this whole video. These connecting words can move around. Sometimes the cause comes first, sometimes the effect comes first, and the position of the word because or so changes depending on that. Don't worry, we'll practice recognizing both patterns as we go. So Priya rushed to the bathroom, brushed her teeth in about 10 seconds, grabbed the first clean shirt she could find, and ran to the kitchen to make coffee. Since she was in such a hurry, she didn't notice that her mug was sitting right at the edge of the counter. Her elbow knocked it, the mug tipped over, and hot coffee spilled all over her white blouse. Oh no, Priya, not the white blouse. As a result, she had to run back to her room and change her clothes completely, which cost her another 5 precious minutes. Let's pause right here for a second, because I want you to really absorb what just happened, logically speaking. There's a whole chain of causes and effects building up, one on top of another, like dominoes falling. The alarm didn't ring. That caused her to wake up late. Waking up late caused her to rush. Rushing caused her to be careless in the kitchen. Being careless caused the coffee spill. And the coffee spill caused her to lose even more time. This is actually really common in real English conversations and stories. One effect becomes the cause of the next problem, and so on, and so on. Native speakers link these ideas together constantly, and if you can follow the chain, you can follow basically any story, any news report, any explanation someone gives you. Now, back to poor Priya. Due to the delay from changing her clothes, she missed her usual bus, the one that would have gotten her to the office right on time. She stood on the sidewalk, staring at the empty street where the bus had just been, and let out this long, frustrated breath. You know that feeling, right? That specific kind of frustration when you can literally see your plan falling apart in front of you? Owing to the fact that there were no more buses for another 20 minutes, she decided to call a taxi instead. This is where things get interesting. The taxi driver, a friendly older man named Farid, picked her up within a few minutes. Priya, still catching her breath, explained the situation. I'm so sorry. I know this is last minute, but I have an important meeting at 9, and I'm already running behind. Farid smiled and said, Don't worry, we'll get there. Traffic's usually calm this early. Given that it was still fairly early in the morning, Farid expected a smooth, quick ride. Unfortunately, that's not exactly what happened. As they turned onto the main road, they discovered that there had been a small accident just a few minutes earlier. 2 cars had bumped into each other at an intersection. Nothing serious, thankfully, but enough to completely block one lane. Consequently, traffic slowed to almost a crawl. Priya watched the clock on the dashboard tick forward, minute by minute, her stomach twisting into knots. This is such a relatable moment, isn't it? That feeling of watching time slip away while you're stuck, unable to do anything about it. Now here's a great chance for you to practice. I want you to pause the video for just a second, right after I finish this sentence, and try to say out loud, in your own words, why Priya's taxi ride was delayed. Go ahead, pause now, and give it a try. Okay, welcome back. Did you say something like, the taxi was delayed because there was an accident? Or, there was an accident, so the taxi was delayed? Either version works perfectly, because both because and so are doing the same logical job here, just from different directions. That's actually a really important thing to understand. Because usually introduces the reason, and it often answers the question, why? So usually introduces the result, and it often answers the question, what happened next? Keep that distinction in your mind as we continue. It'll help you a lot. So, back to the story. Due to the traffic jam, Priya arrived at her office building nearly 25 minutes late. She practically sprinted through the lobby, her heels clicking loudly against the marble floor, and burst into the meeting room completely out of breath. And here's where the story takes an unexpected turn, because the room was empty. Not a single person was there. No client, no colleagues, nothing. Just empty chairs around a long glass table and a faint smell of coffee from a machine in the corner. Priya stood there, confused, her heart still pounding from the run. She checked her phone, and that's when she saw it. A message from her manager, sent about an hour earlier. The client had actually rescheduled the meeting to the following week because of a scheduling conflict on their end. In other words, all that panic, all that rushing, all that spilled coffee, it turned out to be completely unnecessary. Now, I know some of you might be thinking, wait, that's kind of a funny twist, isn't it? And yeah, honestly, it is. Real life does that sometimes. We stress ourselves out over things that end up not mattering at all. But don't worry, this story isn't over yet, because something much more interesting is about to happen to Priya. Something that connects perfectly with everything we're learning today. As Priya stood in that empty meeting room, feeling a strange mix of relief and frustration, her phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from a man named Theo, someone she hadn't heard from in almost 2 years. Theo used to be her closest friend back in university, before life pulled them in different directions, him moving abroad for work, her staying behind to build her career. The message said, "Hey, I know this is out of nowhere, but I'm actually in town for the week. Any chance you're free for coffee?" Because the meeting had been cancelled, Priya suddenly found herself with an entire empty morning, something that almost never happened in her busy schedule. So, without thinking twice, she replied, "I'm actually completely free right now. Where are you?" And that one small coincidence, an alarm clock failing, a spilled coffee, a traffic jam, a cancelled meeting, all of it led her, quite unexpectedly, toward reconnecting with an old friend. Isn't that kind of beautiful, in a way? Sometimes the most annoying, frustrating chain of events ends up opening a door you didn't even know was there. Let's slow down again here, because I want to highlight something important about how English speakers often summarize a whole chain of events using result language. Notice how I said that one small coincidence led her toward reconnecting with an old friend. The phrase "led her toward" is doing exactly the same job as "caused her to" or "resulted in her." These result phrases are everywhere in natural English, especially when someone is telling a story or explaining a situation. And they're incredibly useful for you to recognize, because they often appear right at the moment the speaker is wrapping up an explanation or making a point. Priya walked to a small cafe near her office, the same kind of place with mismatched chairs and handwritten menus that always smells like cinnamon and fresh bread. And there he was, Theo, sitting by the window, looking a little older, a little more tired around the eyes, but with that same easy smile she remembered so well. "You look exactly the same," he said, standing up to hug her. "Well, you clearly don't," she teased, laughing. What happened to you? Did they work you to the bone over there? Theo laughed too and sat back down. Honestly? Yeah. I took a job overseas because the pay was incredible, and because I thought it would be this amazing adventure. And it was, for a while. But the hours were brutal. I was working like 70 hours a week, so I barely had time to sleep, let alone enjoy the city I was living in. Priya nodded slowly, listening carefully. So, why come back now? She asked. Theo's expression shifted slightly, becoming more thoughtful. A few months ago, my grandmother got sick. Since she lives alone, and since none of my cousins are nearby, I realized I needed to be closer to home. That's actually the main reason I'm here this week. I'm looking into transferring back, maybe finding something local. Priya reached across the table and squeezed his hand gently. I'm really sorry about your grandmother, but honestly, I'm kind of glad this whole thing brought you back, even if the reason isn't a happy one. This moment right here is such a natural, perfect example of layered cause and effect in real conversation, the kind you'll hear constantly once your ear is trained for it. Theo took the job because of the pay and the adventure. The long hours were a result of that decision. His grandmother's illness became the reason for reconsidering everything. And because of family responsibility, he ended up back in his hometown, at this exact cafe, at this exact moment, talking to Priya. Every piece connects to the next, like a chain. And once you can hear these little linking words, because, since, so, that's why, the whole story becomes crystal clear, even if you missed a word or two along the way. Let's do another quick practice moment. I want you to think back to what Theo just said, and try to answer this question out loud. Why did Theo decide to come back home? Pause here for a moment and say your answer. Great. If you said something like, he came back because his grandmother got sick, or his grandmother got sick, so he decided to come back, you've got it exactly right. And notice something else too. Did you hear how Theo used since almost the same way as because? Since she lives alone, and since none of my cousins are nearby, both work exactly like because she lives alone, and because none of my cousins are nearby. In casual spoken English, since and because are often completely interchangeable when we're talking about reasons, and native speakers switch between them constantly without even thinking about it. So don't get confused if you hear since being used for a reason instead of for time. It's actually extremely common. Priya and Theo talked for almost 2 hours that morning, catching up on everything they'd missed. Somewhere in that conversation, Priya mentioned her job and how lately she'd been feeling a little stuck, a little uninspired. I love design, she said, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly. But I feel like I've been doing the same kind of projects for years now. Nothing challenges me anymore. Theo tilted his head, thinking. You know, the company I work for, they're actually opening a small design studio here in town. Since you're clearly still passionate about this stuff, maybe you should think about applying. I could introduce you to the hiring manager if you want. Priya's eyes lit up immediately. Wait, seriously? That would be amazing. Because Theo happened to know someone on the inside, Priya suddenly had access to an opportunity she never would have found on her own. As a result, later that same week, she submitted her portfolio, and just a few days after that, she got a call back for an interview. Every single frustrating, chaotic detail of that morning, The broken alarm, the spilled coffee, the traffic, the cancelled meeting, all of it had somehow, almost magically, led her directly to this new possibility. Now here's something I really want you to notice about how this whole story has been told. Almost every single sentence connects logically to the one before it. That's not an accident. That's actually how most real storytelling works in English. Whether it's a friend telling you about their weekend, a news reporter explaining an event, or a colleague walking you through a project update. Ideas rarely just sit there alone, disconnected. They build on each other, cause leading to effect, effect becoming the next cause, over and over. And the words that hold this whole structure together, because, so, since, as, therefore, consequently, as a result, due to, owing to, given that, for this reason, that's why, which led to, these are the glue. Miss the glue, and the whole structure falls apart in your mind, even if you understood every individual word. Let's fast forward a little bit in Priya's story, because I want to show you a few more of these connector words in action, especially some of the more formal ones you'll often hear in interviews, presentations, or professional conversations. About a week later, Priya walked into her interview at the new design studio feeling nervous but excited. The interviewer, a calm, sharp-eyed woman named Ingrid, looked over Priya's portfolio carefully before speaking. "Your work is impressive," Ingrid said, "particularly this branding project here. Can you walk me through your thinking?" Priya explained her process. "So, the client wanted something modern, but they also wanted to keep a sense of tradition. Therefore, I decided to blend a minimalist layout with some hand-drawn elements to represent both sides of their brand identity." Ingrid nodded, clearly impressed. "That's a really thoughtful approach. And due to the way you balance those two directions, the final result feels cohesive rather than confusing, which isn't easy to pull off." Notice that word "therefore" right there. That's a slightly more formal cousin of "so." You'll hear "therefore" a lot in professional settings, presentations, academic discussions, structured explanations. It does exactly the same job as "so," connecting a reason to a result, but it just sounds a little more polished, a little more deliberate. If you're preparing for professional English, whether that's for work, university, or exams, getting comfortable with "therefore," "consequently," and "as a result" is incredibly valuable, because you'll hear them constantly in those formal contexts. The interview continued, and at one point, Ingrid asked Priya a slightly tricky question. "I noticed a small gap in your resume, about 8 months actually, right in the middle of last year. Can you tell me what that was about?" Priya took a breath before answering honestly. "Yes, actually, that's a fair question. My father had a health scare during that time, and given that I'm his only child living nearby, I took a leave of absence to help care for him. He's completely fine now, thankfully, but at the time, it was the right decision for my family." Ingrid's expression softened. "I appreciate you sharing that. And for what it's worth, I don't see that as a weakness at all. If anything, it shows me you have your priorities straight." Priya smiled, relieved. "Thank you. That means a lot. I really love this small moment in the story because it shows something important about cause and effect language. It's not just for explaining logistics or plans. It's also how we talk about our lives, our decisions, our values. Given that I'm his only child is the reason, I took a leave of absence is the result. Simple structure, but emotionally powerful, because it's revealing something real about who Priya is as a person. All right, let's pause the story again for a moment, because I want to give you a slightly bigger practice challenge. I'm going to describe a short situation, and I want you to identify both the cause and the effect, and try to say a full sentence connecting them using any signal word you like. Because, so, since, it's totally up to you. Here's the situation. Marco forgot his umbrella at home. It started raining heavily on his way to work. He arrived at the office completely soaked. Okay, pause the video now and try building your own cause and effect sentence from that situation. Nice work if you paused and tried that. Maybe you said something like, because Marco forgot his umbrella, he got soaked in the rain. Or, Marco forgot his umbrella, so when it started raining, he arrived at the office completely soaked. Both totally work. The important thing isn't finding one perfect answer. It's training your brain to automatically notice which part of a story is the reason and which part is the result. The more you practice this, even with tiny everyday situations like Marco and his umbrella, the faster and more natural this skill becomes, until eventually you won't even have to think about it consciously anymore. You'll just hear the logic instantly, the same way you hear it in your own native language. Now, back to Priya, because there's still a little more to her story, and it wraps up really nicely with everything we've been practicing. A few days after the interview, Priya was sitting at home, anxiously checking her email every 20 minutes, when finally the message arrived. Subject line, "Welcome to the team." She read it 3 times just to make sure she wasn't imagining it. Because she had gotten the job, she immediately called Theo to share the news. "You got in?" he practically shouted through the phone. "Of course you did. I knew they'd love you." "Thank you for the introduction," Priya said, laughing, tears of happiness blurring her vision a little. "Seriously, none of this would have happened without you." That evening, Priya sat by her window, looking out at the same street where, just a couple of weeks earlier, she had watched her bus pull away without her. So much had changed since that chaotic morning. And as she thought back over everything, the broken alarm, the spilled coffee, the traffic jam, the empty meeting room, Theo's unexpected message, the job opportunity, the honest conversation in her interview, she realized something. Every frustrating moment had actually been a small cause, quietly building toward a much bigger, much better effect. Life, she thought, is kind of like that. Messy chains of cause and effect, constantly connecting, constantly leading somewhere, even when we can't see the full picture yet. Okay, let's take a breath here, and let's do a full review of everything we've learned today, because I want to make absolutely sure this sticks with you, not just for today, but for every single English conversation you have from now on. Throughout Priya's story, we heard a whole toolbox of cause and effect signal words. We heard so, which usually introduces a result, and often comes in the middle of a sentence, right after the cause. We heard because and since, both used to introduce reasons, and both completely interchangeable in casual spoken English. We heard as a result, and consequently, slightly more formal ways of introducing a result, often used at the beginning of a new sentence. We heard therefore, another formal result word, common in professional and academic English. We heard due to and owing to, both used to introduce a reason, usually followed by a noun phrase rather than a full sentence. We heard given that, a slightly more thoughtful, reflective way of introducing a reason. And we heard result phrases like led to and led her toward, which summarize a whole chain of events in just a few words. Here's a really important tip I want to leave you with. When you're listening to English, whether it's this video, a podcast, a movie, or a real conversation, train your ear to listen specifically for these small connecting words. They're often short, sometimes just one syllable, and it's incredibly easy for your brain to skip right past them if you're only focused on the big vocabulary words. But these little words are doing enormous work. They're the glue holding the entire logical structure of what someone is saying together. Once you start catching them automatically, you'll notice something amazing happening. You'll stop needing to translate sentence by sentence in your head, because you'll already understand the shape of the idea, the reason, and the result, just from recognizing the signal word. I also want to encourage you to start using these words yourself, in your own speaking and writing, because that's honestly the fastest way to make them stick permanently in your memory. Next time you're explaining why you were late somewhere, try using because or since, instead of just listing two separate facts. Next time you're telling a friend about something that happened to you, try adding so or as a result to connect your sentences more smoothly. It might feel a little unnatural at first, a little slow, but I promise you, within just a couple of weeks of doing this consistently, it will start feeling completely automatic, the same way it does for native speakers. Let's do one more full practice round together before we wrap up, because repetition really is the secret ingredient here. I'm going to read a short passage, a little bit like a mini news update, and I want you to listen carefully for every single cause and effect signal word you can catch. Ready? Here we go. Due to unusually heavy rainfall this week, several roads in the downtown area have been temporarily closed. Since the flooding has made driving dangerous in some neighborhoods, city officials are asking residents to avoid unnecessary travel. As a result, many local businesses have decided to close early for the next few days. However, because the weather forecast shows conditions improving by the weekend, officials expect the roads to reopen soon, and therefore, normal traffic should resume by Monday. Okay, pause the video now if you'd like, and try to list out loud every single connector word you caught in that passage. Take your time. All right, welcome back. Let's check your answers together. Did you catch due to at the very beginning? That introduces the reason for the road closures. Did you catch since, introducing the reason city officials are asking people to avoid travel? Did you catch as a result, introducing the effect of businesses closing early? Did you catch because, introducing the reason officials expect improvement? And finally, did you catch therefore, introducing the final result, that traffic should return to normal by Monday? If you caught all five, that's fantastic. Seriously, that's a huge achievement, because that passage moved fast, just like real news broadcasts do. And if you only caught 2 or 3, that's completely okay too. That's exactly why we practice. That's exactly why you're here watching this video. Every single time you do this kind of exercise, your ear gets a little bit sharper, a little bit faster, a little bit more confident. I want to take a moment here to talk directly to you, honestly, human to human, because I know learning a language, especially working on listening skills, can sometimes feel really discouraging. Maybe you've been studying English for years, and you still feel like you miss things, like conversations move too fast, like movies without subtitles feel impossible. I want you to know that feeling is completely normal, and it does not mean you're bad at English. It usually just means nobody ever specifically taught you to listen for these small structural signals, these logical connector words, the way we've done together today. Vocabulary and grammar are important, sure, but understanding the logic of a sentence, the cause, the effect, the reasoning, that's a whole separate skill, and it's one that gets stronger with focused, intentional practice. Exactly like what we just did with Priya's story and that little news passage. So here's what I'd love for you to do after this video ends. Go find something in English, a short video, a podcast episode, a conversation with a friend, anything at all. And just for 5 or 10 minutes, actively listen for cause and effect words. Don't worry about understanding everything perfectly. Just focus on catching because, so, since, therefore, as a result, due to, whenever they show up. You'll be surprised how often they appear, honestly, way more often than you probably realized before today. And each time you catch one, pause for a second in your mind and ask yourself, okay, what's the cause here and what's the effect? That simple habit, practiced consistently, is genuinely one of the fastest ways to level up your listening comprehension. Before we finish up completely, let's circle back to Priya one final time, just to close her story properly. Because I think it deserves a nice ending, don't you? A few months later, Priya was fully settled into her new job at the design studio. She loved it there, genuinely loved it. The challenging projects, the creative freedom, the supportive team around her. One afternoon, while working on a new campaign, her phone buzzed with a message from Theo. "Hey, you free this weekend? There's a new cafe that opened downtown. Thought we could check it out. Catch up properly this time. No canceled meetings involved." Priya laughed out loud at her desk, drawing a curious glance from a co-worker nearby. "Wouldn't miss it," she replied. And as she set her phone down and looked back at her screen, at the colorful design taking shape under her hands, she felt this quiet, warm sense of gratitude. Because one broken alarm clock, all those months ago, had somehow set off a chain of events that completely changed the direction of her life. Funny how that works sometimes, isn't it? The universe has this strange way of turning our worst mornings into the beginning of something completely unexpected, and often something really wonderful. Now, before we wrap everything up, I actually want to take you a little deeper into Priya's world, because there's another small story connected to all of this, one involving her co-worker, a guy named Julian. And honestly, it gives us a perfect chance to practice even more of these connector words in a slightly different setting, a workplace setting, which is somewhere you'll hear cause and effect language constantly, probably even more than in casual conversation. About a month after Priya started at the design studio, she was paired up with Julian on a big project, rebranding a small chain of bakeries across the city. Julian was a few years older than Priya, sharp, a little sarcastic, but genuinely brilliant at his job. The two of them didn't exactly hit it off right away. Since Julian had been at the studio for almost 5 years, he had very strong opinions about how things should be done. And since Priya was new, she was still finding her footing, still figuring out how much she was allowed to push back. Their first meeting together didn't go smoothly. Julian wanted to go with a bold, modern design, sharp lines, dark colors, very minimalist. Priya, on the other hand, felt strongly that a bakery brand needed warmth, softness, something that felt inviting rather than sleek. Because their visions were so different, the conversation got a little tense. "I just think dark colors don't really scream fresh bread and pastries," Priya said carefully, trying not to sound too confrontational. Julian raised an eyebrow. "And I think warm and soft is exactly what every single bakery brand already looks like. We'd just be blending in." They went back and forth like that for almost half an hour, neither one really budging. Eventually, their manager, Ingrid, the same woman who had interviewed Priya, poked her head into the meeting room. "How's it going in here?" she asked, sensing the tension immediately. "We're just exploring different directions," Julian said dryly. Ingrid smiled knowingly. "Well, since you two clearly have strong, different instincts, why don't you each build a small mock-up of your idea, and we'll compare them side by side on Friday?" Sometimes seeing both versions makes the right direction obvious. Because neither of them wanted to admit defeat without even trying, they both agreed. Over the next few days, something interesting happened. As Priya worked on her warm, inviting version, she found herself borrowing a few sharp, clean, structural elements from the kind of style Julian preferred, just to keep things from feeling too soft, too plain. And as Julian worked on his bold, modern version, he found himself adding small, warm touches, a hand-drawn illustration here, a softer typeface there, almost without realizing it. Funny how that happens, isn't it? When you're pushed to defend your own idea, you sometimes end up quietly absorbing pieces of the other person's perspective, too. On Friday, they presented both mock-ups to Ingrid. She studied them for a long moment, switching her gaze back and forth between the two. "Interesting," she finally said. "You know what's funny? These two designs actually share more in common than you'd think. Priya, yours has this unexpected structural confidence I wasn't expecting. And Julian, yours has genuine warmth, which honestly surprises me a little, coming from you." Julian smirked. "I have layers, Ingrid." Everyone laughed, and the tension in the room finally broke. "Here's what I think we should do," Ingrid continued. "Since both directions clearly have strengths, why don't the two of you combine them? Take the structure and confidence from Priya's version, and the warmth and character from Julian's, and build something new together." Because Ingrid suggested this, and honestly, because deep down both Priya and Julian could see the logic in it, they agreed to try. That collaboration turned into one of the best projects either of them had ever worked on. Working closely together for the next 2 weeks, they discovered they actually complemented each other really well. Priya's instinct for warmth balancing Julian's instinct for boldness. As a result, the final bakery branding they delivered was unlike anything the client had seen from other designers, warm but confident, soft but structured. The client loved it immediately. In fact, due to how well the campaign performed once it launched, the bakery chain saw a noticeable increase in foot traffic within just a few weeks, and they ended up hiring the studio again for a second round of marketing material. I love this little side story, honestly, because it shows cause and effect language being used in a totally different context: workplace disagreement, negotiation, compromise, collaboration. Notice how many connector words showed up again. Since Julian had been at the studio for 5 years, was a reason explaining his confidence. Because their visions were so different, was a reason explaining the tension. Since you two clearly have strong, different instincts, was Ingrid's reason for suggesting the mock-up comparison. Because neither of them wanted to admit defeat, was the reason they both agreed to try it. As a result, introduce the successful outcome of their collaboration. And, due to how well the campaign performed, introduce the reason they got hired again. That's 6 more examples, all in one short story, all sounding completely natural, completely conversational. Nothing forced or textbook-like about it. Let's practice again, because honestly, at this point, repetition is your best friend. I'm going to describe another small situation, slightly trickier this time, with 2 connected cause and effect chains instead of just one. And I want you to try explaining the whole thing out loud, using at least 2 different connector words. Ready? Here's the situation. Sophia stayed up too late finishing a work project. Because she was so tired the next morning, she accidentally left her laptop charger at home. Since she didn't have her charger, her laptop battery died in the middle of an important video call. Go ahead, pause the video now, and try explaining this whole chain of events out loud, from start to finish, using connector words naturally. Welcome back. However you phrased it, whether you said, Sophia stayed up too late, so she was tired the next morning, and because she was tired, she forgot her charger, which meant her laptop died during her call, or some other combination. The important thing is that you practiced tracking a longer chain, cause leading to effect, effect becoming a new cause, leading to another effect. This is exactly the kind of layered thinking real English conversations require. And every time you practice it, even with a made-up example like Sophia and her charger, you're building the exact mental muscle you need for real listening comprehension. I also want to point out something slightly different that I used in that explanation, the phrase, which meant. That's another really common, really natural way native speakers express result, especially in casual spoken English. Her charger was at home, which meant her laptop died during the call. Notice how which meant comes right after a full idea, almost like a comment added onto the end of a sentence, explaining the consequence. You'll hear this pattern constantly, which meant, which caused, which led to, which resulted in. They all function basically the same way as so or therefore. They're just slightly more flexible because they can attach onto the end of any sentence without needing to start a brand new one. Let's go back to Priya one more time, because I want to show you one final layer of this story. Something that happens near the end, a conversation between Priya and her father, since we mentioned earlier that he had a health scare, and I think this gives us a chance to practice with a slightly more emotional, personal tone, which is honestly where a lot of real-life cause and effect conversations happen, isn't it? Not just in news reports or workplace meetings, but in quiet, honest conversations with people we love. One evening, Priya visited her father, Arjun, at his home for dinner. something they tried to do at least once a week since his recovery. Over a simple meal of rice and lentils, her father asked about her new job. "It's going really well," Priya said, smiling. "Actually, remember that bakery project I told you about? It launched last week, and it's already doing better than anyone expected." Arjun beamed with pride. "I always knew you had that talent in you. Even when you were little, you used to redesign the labels on all my old spice jars. Remember that?" Priya laughed. "I forgot about that completely." There was a comfortable pause, and then Arjun's expression grew a little more serious. "You know, I've been thinking a lot lately, especially since my health scare last year. Life is strange, isn't it? One moment everything feels stable, and then, because of one small thing, one diagnosis, one scare, everything changes completely. At least for a while." Priya reached over and took his hand. "I know. I think about that morning a lot too, actually. The morning everything with my job and Theo happened. If my alarm hadn't broken that day, none of this might have happened the way it did." Arjun nodded thoughtfully. "That's the strange thing about cause and effect in real life, isn't it? We never really know, in the moment, which small thing is going to end up mattering the most. Since we can't predict it, I think the best we can do is just try to stay open, stay grateful, even during the frustrating, chaotic mornings." Priya smiled, feeling a little emotional. "That's a really good way to put it, Dad." Because of that health scare, difficult as it had been, both of them had come away from it with a slightly deeper appreciation for the small, ordinary moments they shared together. Dinners like this one, quiet conversations, simple gratitude. I wanted to include that quieter, more emotional scene, because I think it's important for you to hear cause and effect language used not just in fast-paced stories or workplace disagreements, but in slow, thoughtful, heartfelt conversations too. The structure is exactly the same. Since, because, which meant, but the tone completely changes depending on the situation. That flexibility is actually one of the most beautiful things about these connector words. They work everywhere, in every kind of conversation, formal or casual, exciting or quiet, professional or deeply personal. Let's do one more listening practice round together. A slightly longer one this time, almost like a mini monologue. The kind of thing you might actually hear someone say in a podcast interview. I want you to listen closely, and afterward, try to summarize, in your own words, using at least 3 connector words, what happened and why. Here it is. When I was younger, I honestly never thought I'd end up working in this field. I actually studied something completely different in university. But because the job market was so difficult when I graduated, I ended up taking a temporary position at a small design agency, just to pay the bills. Since I didn't have any formal training in design, I had to teach myself everything after work, staying up late almost every night watching tutorials. It was exhausting, honestly. But as a result of all that self-teaching, I ended up developing a style that was completely different from everyone else at the agency, because I wasn't following the traditional rules I would have learned in school. Due to that unique style, one of my early projects caught the attention of a much bigger company, and they offered me a full-time position. So, in a strange way, struggling to find a job in my original field ended up leading me exactly where I was supposed to be. All right, pause the video now and try summarizing that whole story out loud, using at least 3 connector words of your choice. Welcome back. However you summarized it, hopefully you noticed the layered structure again. Difficulty finding a job leading to a temporary position, lack of formal training leading to self-teaching leading to a unique style, and that unique style leading to a full-time job offer. 4 separate cause and effect links, all connected together into one smooth, natural-sounding story. This is genuinely how so much real spoken English works, especially when people are explaining their own life experiences, their careers, their decisions. Once you can comfortably follow chains like this, you'll find that interviews, podcasts, and even casual conversations with new people become dramatically easier to follow. Because you're no longer just catching individual facts, you're catching the entire logical shape of the story as it's being told to you. All right, that brings us to the end of today's story and today's lesson. But honestly, this is really just the beginning for you, because now that you know what to listen for, every English conversation you have from this point forward is an opportunity to practice. So here's my call to action for you, and I mean this genuinely, not just as a routine YouTube outro. First, if this video helped you understand cause and effect signals a little more clearly, hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel grow, and it helps more English learners just like you find these lessons. Second, subscribe to English in Fluency if you haven't already, because we release new listening practice videos regularly, covering all sorts of real, practical English skills, not just boring textbook grammar, but the actual patterns you'll hear in real conversations, real shows, real everyday life. Third, and this one's really important, leave a comment down below and try writing your own cause and effect sentence using any of the connector words we practiced today. Because, so, since, therefore, as a result, whatever feels most natural to you. I read every single comment, and I would genuinely love to see what you come up with. It's honestly one of my favorite parts of making these videos, seeing you all practice in real time. And finally, if you know someone else who's working on their English listening skills, a friend, a classmate, a family member, please consider sharing this video with them. Learning a language is so much easier, and honestly so much more fun, when you're not doing it completely alone. Maybe you and a friend could even practice together, taking turns making up little stories using cause and effect words, kind of like a game. Trust me, it works, and it's actually a lot of fun once you get into it. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. I really do appreciate it, more than you probably realize. Keep listening actively. Keep noticing those small connector words. Because, so, since, therefore, as a result, due to, and keep believing in your own progress, even on the days it feels slow. Every single conversation you practice, every single video you watch actively instead of passively, it's all adding up, building toward a version of you that listens to English with total confidence. The same way Priya's messy, chaotic morning ended up building toward something wonderful she never saw coming. I'm Alex. This has been English in Fluency, and I will see you in the next lesson. Take care of yourselves, keep practicing, and I'll talk to you very soon.